Most of my time talking with virtual design and construction professionals, or VDC, is on the electrical side of things, so medium voltage on those side of building projects and electrical contractors. These conversations usually focus on the use of BIM or building information modeling and prefabrication or prefab, as new and alternative methods and tools to complete projects. So I was excited to ask Jason Young, Virtual Design Director at IES Communications, if he could, talk to us about how he's implemented and seen the principles of VDC used in the telecom space to improve the efficiency of those construction projects. Jason has over 20 years of experience in AEC industries, focused specifically on BIM and VDC implementation and adoption since 2011. Welcome to Keeping the Lights On. I'm your host, Todd Reed, and on this show, I spend time with the owners and pros who design, build, and maintain our electrical, communications, and industrial world to explore the best ways forward. Let's get into the show. All right, well, so we talked about this. We start out each episode, Jason, with the food that brings us together, right? Because we can come together over a meal. So if I were to visit you, or the listeners were to visit you in your hometown, where might you take them?
One of my favorite places to eat here in Phoenix is Pizzeria Bianco. It's this local restaurant. The guy comes from an Italian family, and he looked at the pizza in Italy, and instead of trying to recreate that by importing ingredients from Italy to Arizona, he looked at how they were sourcing things, right? They were sourcing local ingredients, and so he took that mentality and brought it here. So it's ingredients from Arizona and Southern California. The tomatoes are grown in California. The wheat comes from Arizona. A lot of the produce is like local, honey, pistachios, things like that.
Wow.
And so he makes these pizzas with these local ingredients, and it's not crazy expensive. It's a very kind of homely place that you can just go and eat. One of the things that people note when they go there is it's not like hitting you with flavor, right? It's not this like thing, but it's that kind of simple ingredients done really well, and it kind of lets those ingredients shine, which I really love. That kind of philosophy around food.
Are you get the same kind of thing every time you go kind of person, or do you change it, or so? What do you like to get there?
Yeah, I've had everything. I've been there enough that I've had all of their pizzas. My two favorites are, and it depends, like if I'm there with my wife, she doesn't like meat pizzas really, so we like to get the Rosa, which is red onion and pistachio, which is an interesting combination on pizza. Yeah. It's really good, interesting, and again, it's not like this huge flavor bomb, but it's really like interesting. If you want that flavor bomb, the Wise Guy is kind of a white onion sausage. It's all locally made. The crust is really good. So yeah, I think if we were to go to lunch, I'd get the Wise Guy and like a margarita to kind of show both sides of it.
Yeah, cool. Well, that sounds good. So now I need to come to Arizona and go there.
Yeah,
so
yeah, I'd love to take you.
Well, I always try to find some clever way to tie in the restaurant question with the topic. This is going to be kind of a stretch, but whatever. So, those restaurants run on data just like every other business.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
But there's more telecom being put in buildings just with all the interconnected stuff with the electrical equipment and local data centers and all that stuff. But as I said in the intro, one of the things that when I go to a lot of conventions and stuff, talking to contractors and installers and things on the both medium and low voltage side, and they've been talking about VDC on the electrical side for a long time, and I hear just less about it on the telecom side. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring you on, because you've got a little bit of experience on the telecom side. But before we move too deep into this, I do kind of want to make sure we're on the same page. And can you define VDC for myself and the audience?
Sure. The way I think about VDC is really all of the data around construction. So it can be anywhere from the rapid visualization models that architects put together to the light studies they do, HVAC calculations if they're coming from a virtual environment, to the BIM models, laser scanning, drone topography, 4D, 5D scheduling, model-based takeoffs, all of those things. And a lot of it we're doing traditionally on paper or, virtually in Bluebeam, right? But if it's coming out of that environment, that model environment, that becomes under the purview of VDC.
So, what do you mean by 4D and 5D?
So 4D basically introduces the element of time into the model. So you can do scheduling inside the model, assigning tasks to schedule increments, and then you can animate that. So you can kind of look visually at the building going up and making sure things are sequenced correctly. From our perspective, before we get into a building, we need a structure, right? So we want to make sure that stuff's in place. We probably want to get in after the HVAC. So looking at the sequencing of the schedule in an animation is able to kind of open that up a little bit. And then 5D is assigning cost to those elements and those time increments. So 4D is time, 5D is time and cost into that 3D environment.
Interesting. Okay. As I said, I've heard about prefab for many, many years, almost all my time in the industry, and BIM for a little bit less, and then VDC for a little bit less, right? Kind of new terminology and all that. And it's kind of fun watching the evolution of how contractors are finishing their work. But let's talk a little bit how VDC, and you mentioned these terms, how VDC is related to BIM and prefab. How do the three work together? And I'll just, for the audience, I said this in the intro, but BIM is building information modeling and prefab is prefabrication. So
that's right. Yep.
So anyway.
And VDC is virtual design and construction.
Correct.
So
Thank you.
In general, how they're defined is BIM is an element of VDC. So I talked about VDC as being, all of these things. The building information model is one piece of that. And why we use the VDC term is because it's more kind of all-encompassing. Really, BIM is defining that model. And it's really about the information inside the model. We have, architectural drawings. We've had them, forever. What BIM does is kind of put data inside that in a 3D environment. So the walls know their walls, the windows know their windows. You get that intelligence, and then from our perspective, we can assign each data drop, each access control point to what panel they're going to, what patch panel they're going to, what endpoint, head end, things like that. So that's kind of the, ideally that's the single source of information inside the hub of VDC, and all of that empowers the prefabrication process, which is just kind of building out kits and items that we can build offsite, put it inside the building, so that they're replicable, right? But having that model really enables that because we can test it. We can make sure we're using the same piece, that it's going to fit in that place where it needs to be, right? And then build it offsite and bring it in, and know it's going to fit exactly where it needs to go.
Right. So, prefab's been done for, I'll say very long time.
A long time, yeah.
Even before BIM came around. So it seems like but the challenge with prefab is that, you build something in the shop, you take it out to the job site, and it's like, crap, it doesn't fit, or it doesn't work because they changed something.
Yep.
So it seems like these VDC, principles are going to help prefab be more efficient.
Exactly. You can test it, right? And that's really kind of how we look at it. Is it's really finding faults in things earlier in the process.
Are you seeing, so again, from the telecom side, are you seeing buyers of construction, so building owners, managers, whatever, are you seeing them asking for VDC to be used on their projects more often?
We are. It only takes one or two projects where you don't include the low voltage contractor in your BIM process to really learn that lesson. It's all great, getting the ductwork to fit in, but once you get into the building and the ceiling speakers don't fit because the duct is in the way, or there's a beam in the way where they're supposed to be, it becomes very clear. Let's get the low voltage contractor involved here. In all of the spaces we're seeing, on the AV side, it's very, very critical to get those considerations in the model, especially early on in the design phase, even before the construction coordination, just because of, you want view ranges to be correct on projectors, you want speaker coverage to be what it needs to be. So, a data center is one thing, right? And even 10 years ago, the data center owners were looking at the data centers as, we need power and we need cooling. And then we would come in and say, this building's not going to run very well as a data center if we don't have data in it, right? and that didn't take very long for them to kind of start seeing that and getting us involved really early. And now we're seeing it more in the industrial side and in medical. We're getting really involved early on from the owner's perspective, which is great.
Yeah, that's good. So you mentioned a few of the advantages of VDC, but I'm curious, like what advantages or positive changes have you seen, like on a job that uses or embraces VDC principles versus a similar job that doesn't for whatever reason?
We really look at it because we know it's expensive, right? So we try to look at it from what we're delivering, and how I talk about it is it's finding the conflicts early. It's low risk because there's nothing built, there's no material necessarily ordered or prefabricated, any of those things. So we're putting everything into this virtual environment, finding any conflicts, any design busts, anything like that we can issue RFIs for. We can then kit out our prefabrication, but we're moving the coordination in front of all of the kind of boots on the ground effort. So instead of having people in the field waiting to kind of work through a conflict or work through a coordination effort with another trade, we're doing that up front. We have fewer people on the project. They're typically remote. So we're getting time savings in the field because they're not having to work through those things. The project schedule ends up being longer because we're involved early. But it's less time wasted in the field, less material wastage because we're not bending pipe and then having to throw it away because we kind of know what the pipe needs to look like because we've worked through it all. And then getting those early RFIs answered to me is really critical, right? We can identify anything that we need to tweak early on rather than, again, drywall starts to go up and, hey, if this doesn't work, we have to tear everything out, or we have a conflict with a duct or a beam or any of those conflicts that can come up during construction.
Where is the telecom side of the construction overall? So not IES specifically, but in the life cycle of using prefab, BIM, and the principles of VDC compared to other disciplines in construction.
I think we're a little bit behind, the curve. I think BIM really was adopted early on by the mechanical contractors. Early on, they would run the coordination effort. They got a lot of benefit out of it really early on. They could fabricate all of their duct right out of the model. It was kind of built for them, and then plumbing comes behind, and then electrical, and then we're kind of coming behind electrical. So I think in general we're catching up, but we're kind of behind the curve, because like I said earlier, the clients are seeing more benefit of having those things in the model. Coming up, even on the software side, Autodesk is starting to support low voltage security, audiovisual more in their software. So Revit 2024 has more data tools built into the software from a circuiting perspective, which is always kind of on the data side. We're always trying to shoehorn things in kind of across the industry, and now those tools are native. So even that, again, as the tools catch up, we're able to do more, and then we push it, and then the tools catch up with that too. So I think we're getting there with everybody else.
My next two questions, I do also want to kind of talk about the industry in a more broad way. And,
sure.
So what are the challenges have you maybe heard from your peers or whatever in adopting the principles of VDC within a telecom contractor?
I think cost is definitely up there in priority as a hurdle. There's more expensive computers, there's relatively expensive hardware, you have the people kind of running it. But I think the biggest hurdle is actually culture. We need to be adopted as part of the overall process for it to pay off. I talk a lot about return on investment. It is expensive, but we can get a lot of benefit out of it that offsets that investment. But we don't get that if the culture's not bought into it. So from a process perspective, from an operations perspective, the more buy-in that VDC has, the more benefit you're gonna see on the other side.
Okay. So then how does a telecom contractor overcome these challenges and actually start implementing?
I would say start slow. Pick a project that you feel can be successful. You could either, direct hire somebody to start it. That's how I got my start. I came in. I was a one-person crew, basically doing the modeling, doing the as-built, kind of running the whole ship, which was a huge benefit for me and for the company I was working for at the time. I got to kind of see the whole process from start to finish, and then as I build the process, you kind of see, okay, the beginning needs to look like this so that the outcome can look like this. You can kind of reverse engineer all of that. There's also a lot of companies, the Autodesk resellers or other consultants that'll either, outsource a small team or kind of build standards for you. And you can kind of have them start that process for you. I would say kind of dedicate, a superintendent or a lead, somebody like that, to kind of be really involved in the process, again, just to kind of get that buy-in. They're seeing, okay, here's where it started, here's where we got. If we were to do it internally, we want to tweak this. But using a consultant like that would at least give you, a foot in the door, that kind of baseline of standards and process to start from.
Yeah. I liked your comment about culture. I think that's what I see in all contractors, because you're changing the way you're working, and anytime you change the way you work, especially if it's an old company, that can disrupt the culture. And why it's not accepted, I think, because it's like there's too much institutional knowledge. Like, nope.
We've done it this way. We know how to do it. I talk about a 3-year cycle for change. We kind of get that early buy-in from, it's not cutting edge, right? But it's the kind of early adoption internally, and then that culture shift takes about 3 years. I've seen that play out, over a few companies. But knowing that, right, you can go in and just embrace the challenges along the way and find those places like, okay, this team's not really adopting or buying in. Let's spend some time there, right? Let's sell internally. And I think that is a big part of it. If there's somebody inside the company who sees the benefit and wants to explore this, you start talking to those stakeholders internally, pre-con, operations, management, all of those people, kind of getting them to buy into the vision of what you're trying to do.
Where do you see VDC and prefab happening in the life cycle of your typical projects? And follow-up question, have you noticed its inclusion moving earlier into the process?
I have. As a whole, the industry, I think, is trying to push those things earlier on. I think coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing material and labor being issues, and there are always issues, right? It's always cost, time, and labor. But it's being seen as a tool to kind of help alleviate that. So owners are buying into it, general contractors are buying into it, and I think even the contractors, the subcontractors are building it into their schedules earlier on, building it into their cost models, so that it's not kind of this. It used to be like an add-all at the end, right? BIM services as a separate line item. Now it's in there natively. This is how we do business. This is how we need to do business to be successful with these condensed schedules, these condensed operations teams, crews in the field, things like that.
One of the things that I've started hearing the term, and I think this is an old term in IT and software things, but it's kind of newer to contractors, and that's the concept of tech stacks.
Yep.
So again, it's real easy. All you have to do is just start digging into what, BIM and all this stuff, and you start to get overwhelmed by all the programs. There's always new programs out there. So what kind of types of programs are most critical to getting it going?
That's a great question, and I really liked your episode on the contractors tech stack. I think it's an important consideration that we don't really think about. I think even as management, it's something that we can end up with. All of a sudden, we have 15 programs across 20 teams, and half are using this and half are using that, and so I think it's a great conversation for subcontractors, especially to look at. And it's tough on our side, right? Because we can't necessarily have something that's holistic, because we're always at the whim of the client or the general contractor who has their own tech stack that we have to integrate in with. So I think from a VDC perspective, the big player is Autodesk. The most important tools that we're using are Revit and Navisworks. With those, and they come in a bundle together, thankfully. Those are the tools that you'll really need to get your modeling and coordination off the ground. And then really all of the other stuff can integrate into that. Mm-hmm. As we look deeper into the tech stack, I would say anything that can if you have one package, I think that becomes easier, right? We don't have the luxury always of having, the software developers or engineers in-house to, mess with APIs and get this to talk to this, even though, the website says they can. So that consideration of getting data to be in the same environment is definitely a key. And then keeping an eye on, we also know that we have to integrate into whatever the general contractor or the owner is using on their projects as well.
That's interesting. You're talking about data in the same spot. It gets me thinking about my conversation I had with someone about AI and the importance of data management. It's almost the most crucial thing there. Let's touch on that real quick because it has to come up in every single conversation I have here lately. AI, what role does that play now, and how do you see that moving forward?
It's interesting to watch these trends in construction. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and you see them. And BIM was one 12 years ago that was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Let's explore that, and it gets adopted. And then drones are the next hot thing, and then VR and AR is the next thing, and we see some benefits in there. And I think from a construction perspective, I think AI is important for us to all pay attention to. But I think we need to be looking at AI from kind of a different perspective than I think the mass population is thinking about AI. And like you mentioned, I think data is a big key of that. Having AI look at your opportunities, looking at your estimating, looking at your efficiencies, and finding patterns. I think finding trends is important so that we can ride the wave of positive trends and address negative changes or negative trends. But I think from a VDC perspective, AI is going to help us get tools to be more efficient, but it's not going to take our jobs, really, right? Getting an AI to model cable tray and conduit and devices in a Revit environment is a long way away. It's not really doing that, but using AI to look at your bill of materials and help you find the best cost somewhere, or look at your buying trends with distributors and seeing, if there are trends in material pricing and shipping pricing and things like that, and being able to jump on the back of that is really important. My former boss told me something that I like to reiterate a lot. He says, AI is not going to take your job, but someone who knows how to utilize AI will. Right? So I think from our perspective, and that's what I tell my team too, right? This isn't something to be afraid of right now. We're not going to be automated out, but I think there are tools out there that we can be utilizing to be more efficient, more effective.
Yeah, I've heard that before, kind of broadly, like it's the people who know how to integrate and to work with it and ask the questions. It knows how to ask the AI questions to get the results that'll be helpful. So that's cool. Okay. Just kind of came to my mind here. Typically these principles, VDC, prefab, BIM, and all, people think of large projects, right? A huge hospital or data center or something, which is understandable why it works in those environments, because there's a lot of repetitive and it's big and the money's there to pay for all the things we've talked about. Sure. Well, but I'm curious, do you see opportunities for use on smaller projects?
I do. I think a lot of it's that balance of return on investment, right? So I've seen it happen in even places that you wouldn't think traditionally of BIM. Basically side by side doing two church buildings, one without it, one with BIM, and just the benefits on the backside, the schedule impacts they had because, the steel didn't end up being fabricated right or being designed right or whatever it was. When we're able to find those things in the model, it just removes all of that risk on the backside. And then again, there's complex AV systems from a low voltage perspective in these buildings, and they want their building now. churches don't have a lot of money to build these buildings. They're, putting a lot at risk to do this. So from a contractor and subcontractor perspective, I think it's important for us to look at that. And yeah, there's a little bit more cost up front, but we're going to see dividends on the backside of it. And then as we look at other things that traditionally wouldn't have BIM or VDC, we look at apartment buildings, right? Wood frame buildings typically don't get modeled because things are pretty easy to kind of make workarounds for. But as we look ahead a little bit, we're seeing more modular construction in apartment buildings, things like that. And then VDC becomes critical. If we don't know that these parts and pieces are going to fit exactly how they need to, duct tying to duct, if that's not modeled, you're going to prefabricate all of these buildings, all these modular buildings, or all of these, parts and pieces, and then you're going to get out to the field, they're not going to fit. So I think even on those smaller projects, it's worth looking at it, seeing the complexity of the internal systems. Maybe if there's a site consideration, you model it to plan ingress and egress, or crane pathways, which we've done a lot in my former life. Looking at safety considerations, all of those things can be modeled in that 3D environment and really get that payoff at the end.
Let's move to the future of VDC and prefab. Like where do you see it going in the next couple of years, especially in relation to the telecom space?
I think with the tools we're getting now, we're going to be able to add more information, kind of getting that eye and BIM really, really involved. And we're seeing more and more clients asking for more and more detail, which to me is exciting, right? It's allowing for planning, allowing for the data, the information to live inside this model and be that single source of information. So as we tie the data, through AI and other things into this, our greater resource planning, we can reverse engineer our schedules. We can pre-order material. And we're seeing more and more clients want more and more detail. So nuts and bolts, things like that. We're able to just pull right out of the model. It gives them more assurance that their project's going to be constructible, and it gives us all of this information that we can pull out, bulk order material, and get ahead of the curve. And then on the prefab side, like I said before, there's still concerns around material and labor, and all of these things are always a consideration. You can use the model, kit out your pieces. And I think, again, going to the planning, the more you can front load the planning of, hey, we're going to do prefabrication on this. We want to do this, this, and this. And then the modeling team, as they're doing it, they can just, you build one of these kits and you just use that over and over again. And you push back on, the other contractors and the general contractor, like, this is our kit. This is what we're going to use for this. We're going to use it, right? And then you send that to your prefab shop in a small warehouse space. They just build, 100 of it. It's safer there. It's more cost effective, less material waste. So I think both of those are just we're going to see more and more volume of that in the future.
Yeah. Is there something you would like to see in the next few years that, I don't know, kind of if you could run the world, if you could be president?
Yeah. My dream has always been to see operational models more ingrained in what our clients are doing. If you Google BIM, you'll always see kind of this circle, and it's, design, construction, estimating, and it goes at the end, it's like operations, moves, adds, changes, things like that. And that operational model, I think a few customers use it, but having it not end at the end of construction, having this model be used in facilities like hospitals, like data centers, where they know what's in each switch because it's in the model, and that's pulling into a database, and they're able to manage, watch their devices, power draws, things like that. As I think as the another buzzword, Internet of Things, as that becomes more and more real, there's more and more data to capture in all of these little parts and pieces. And yeah, you can put it in a spreadsheet or a database, and it can monitor it against a back end. But having that 3D environment as part of it, I think is key.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people talking about that. It's kind of but it seems like it's a future, like the post-construction use of the data. But
It does, and I hope it's sooner rather than later. I've seen companies talk about it and see it kind of come into fruition a little bit, but it's really not as robust as it needs to be for general adoption.
right. Yeah, I think obviously it'll be a very large user will start adopting it and start seeing benefits, and that'll spread to others. So, Jason, we like to close out our conversation by refocusing on the why of what we do. So, what motivates you to do this day in and day out? What keeps you excited about and passionate about what you do?
Sure. I love this industry. It's so exciting. There's this constant push of technology, kind of evaluating in the marketplace what we should adopt and when. It's just this kind of constant challenge. The planning that we get out of the model, planning for prefab, planning around schedule, all of these things that just kind of my OCD brain kind of likes putting things in places, and seeing that come out of this 3D environment is really great. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's just really cool to be able to build something virtually at a computer and then go walk it as it's being built, right? You see the things that you've planned for. You see the conflicts that could have happened or that did happen in the model that you caught, and here's the resolution we came up with, and especially on the low voltage side, all of this 3/4 inch, 1 inch conduit kind of going through a building. It's just really cool to see, especially in these more complex buildings. And in my role now, as a leader of leaders, I like seeing my leaders grow. I like seeing them grow into their roles and empowering their teams. It's exciting every day. I like to see every little piece of this business.
Yeah. Do you spend much time on job sites?
I do. Yeah.
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 Kind of checking the work and all that. Yeah.
Exactly. And just, from my perspective, it's important to kind of stay up with what we're doing as an industry, right? See what other trades are doing, see where the models are taking us, see what pain points the general contractors and owners are having around VDC in general, and where we can help kind of ease those pain points.
Okay. Awesome. All right, Jason, thank you so much for being here. It's been great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
That was my conversation with Jason Young, Virtual Design Director at IES Communications. You can connect with Jason and what he's working on by heading to the links in the show notes. I would love to hear how you're implementing VDC principles into your telecom projects. You can email me at podcast@graybar.com. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving a 5-star rating in your favorite podcast player and on YouTube. Thanks for listening to this episode of Keeping the Lights On. We'll see you next time. What advice would you give to 18-year-old Jason?
I like this question a lot. It's something I've been thinking about. I have an 18-year-old son, and I have an 18-year-old nephew who's joining the Marine Corps. And so I thought a lot about it because I was in the military. My nephew's going off. Like, what advice would I give to somebody in that place? And it's something I didn't realize I started doing, but in my kind of early mid-20s, upon reflection, I realized where I started gaining success is two things, really. Show up on time and say yes. And so that's the advice I've given these two young men. And that's what I want out of my employees. That's those two things. It's really that simple, right? Somebody gives you assignment, don't push back on it. Just accept it, do it to the best of your ability, and be there on time. It's really not that hard,
Yeah, pretty simple. And by on time, do you mean early?
I do. Yeah, it's 15 minutes